because every language has its own flavor, its own strengths. Every language has its own paths through the brain.
Okay, so Albert, it's great to see you here in the outskirts of Beijing at this very large conference on the classics.
Yeah.
Could I ask you maybe to introduce yourself to the listeners or to the viewers? Like, what do you do and what's your connection with East Asia?
All right, I'll do so. I'm Albert Hoffstädt, and I've been an editor at Brill for 28 years. I started off as an Western classics, Latin and Greek, that's my original training. And after 1 year, the then director, he asked me to take over Asian studies. And I did. I didn't hesitate for one moment, because unlike the classics, there is so much still to be found out, especially for Westerners. And the classics, that's a closed corpus of texts, which has been studied by brilliant minds for hundreds of years already. Not much interesting comes to it for the occasional papyrus in Egypt, documentary papyrus. But China is one that is much to be explored and found and studied for Westerners, because it's a different world. And it is it's just a massive and very impressive culture at that. So it's worth studying it.
So how long have you been doing this?
Now 27 years, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we know from your presentation actually that Brill has been at it also for a very long time.
Brill, the origins of Brill were in early Qing dynasty, 1683, as one of the small printing presses surrounding the then new Leiden University. And some way or other it survived through the centuries, so more than 340 years now. Its predecessor was called Luchtmans, but a major clerk took over from the last family member around 1860 or something. And then it became E.J. Evert Jan Brill. So that's the history. So it's a slight twisting of history, because Brill didn't start in 1683. It was Luchtmans that started in 1683. But it was quite a famous press, and it had its really important publications in the past, and still, we hope. Yeah.
Okay. And I know that Brill was also instrumental in kind of starting the printing of Chinese characters in Europe, right?
Yes. By the end of the 19th century, it dawned upon the Dutch colonizers of the Indies, the Dutch Indies, then called Dutch Indies, current Indonesia, that its civil servants needed to learn Chinese, because the economic elite was Chinese in Indonesia. So they appointed a chair in Chinese studies and Japanese studies in Leiden. And of course, as a press in Leiden, Brill tried to make use of that. And they persuaded the government to buy a Chinese molds to cast characters from in Holland. And they bought it with the missionaries in Shanghai. I forgot the exact name, but some scholar, Dutchman actually, in Princeton, he traced the history exactly. And these molds still exist. We discovered a few years ago in some museum or some big company in Amsterdam. But that was the beginning of course, in the wake of our interest in Indonesia, Chinese publications were done, but clumsily so, or only with transcription. But then it seriously started. So say our history in Chinese studies is about 130 years old.
Okay.
Or 140 years old, yeah.
That's very good.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean I'm 140 years old, no.
Yes.
No. So don't confuse the two things. Yeah.
One thing that's valuable in Brill when you publish is that you can use Chinese characters in the text.
Yes.
Directly, right?
Yes.
Which is, for some reason, it's not that common in other presses even today, or not with every press.
No longer. It's very, it's a bit contradictory with the American or the European and the European university presses were started by their universities in order to publish those materials which would never reach a wider audience. So it's exactly for the complex printing and typesetting that these presses began. Well, nowadays, good old commercial Brill has taken over the task, and many university presses, they ask you to take out the Chinese characters.
Yes.
And they refuse to make use of footnotes, which I think we at Brill think are much more convenient to scholars. And they prefer endnotes. And they try to sell to bookshops, which means that you have to use simpler language. Well, what you as scholars need, and our works are by scholars for scholars. Our books are not in bookshops, they're sold directly to the world centers of learning, let's put it like that. In the second instance, often at a discount to scholars themselves, especially authors, they get discount. And we have our campaigns, but our primary market is the world institutional market.
I see, yeah. It's actually, the footnotes, they're not only more convenient, but like they're the only way to go if you're looking at a PDF, right? Because jumping back and forth in a PDF to endnotes is ridiculously difficult.
It's ridiculously different, yeah.
Or if you copy a chapter for students, then it becomes, again, you need to go back and copy the endnotes.
I can imagine. Yes. So, but to put it quite bluntly, our books being perceived highly priced, I can tell you a story. This is what it takes in the commercial press. In finance, a huge difference between university presses and commercial presses. For us, those few dollars it takes to make this extra effort for footnotes and inserting the characters doesn't play much of a role, given our position as a very specialist academic press, trying to keep to high standards. We believe we have to keep these standards which scholars like you appreciate most. And we understand why, I think.
Yeah, we could definitely appreciate lower prices a little bit, because right now, students would, or even us probably, not buy the book directly.
No.
But maybe ask the library to buy it. Yes. But students definitely would not buy it.
No, and that's a disagreeable message, but there is no other way.
Okay.
Our margins are not that big. A few years ago, I don't know what the economics interests you at all, but about 8 years ago, there was a survey among 5 American university presses to make an honest accounting of the profits for a specialist monograph, taking into account all the costs that we make as a commercial press. We have no external subvention. So that means paying for the building, paying for the salaries, paying taxes, just to mention 3. You know what the average income of a scholarly monograph is? minus $30,000.
Minus 30,000.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's there you start to understand why without subventions, without any external help, every penny we spend, we have to earn first and more. Why the price difference is so high. So I never say that our books are expensive, but they do cost a lot. But that's because the American presses or the university presses are often so unfairly cheap. As a student, I never bought one Brill book, by the way, and I know exactly why. But this is just harsh reality. It's not. And we work pretty efficiently at Brill. It's in our best interest.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. But recently, you also started doing online things, right?
Yeah.
So can you say something about that?
Yeah, I think in the early years of 2000, we started with the journals because that makes the most sense. But by now, we publish everything at the same time, online and in print. Everything, books, journals, reference works, and even some works databases are being published online only.
Yeah, that's what I meant, actually, the databases.
Yes.
So when did that start?
When it became possible to publish online. Then the first databases came along. And we never start because we were too small a press to start things. With Elsevier and the big presses, they start things and we just wait until it settles, and then we follow suit when the technology has become cheaper and the standards are becoming clear. So Brill is always slightly lagging behind there.
Okay.
But on the whole, our scholars are not working. The scholars published with this are not working on the most modern stuff, as you know.
Yeah.
So, fine.
Okay. And in Chinese studies, one of the most welcome contribution was Paul Kroll's dictionary,
Yes.
right? The Student's Dictionary of
Yes.
Medieval Chinese.
Yes, classical medieval Chinese.
Yes.
Yes.
And why did Brill decide to do that? Because it was a costly project, right?
That was a very costly project,
Yes.
but worthwhile. And there are several reasons. I myself have always been a very grateful user of dictionaries. And before I came to Brill, I was an editor at a publishing house for dictionaries only. So I knew somewhat what it entails. And that's in the end why they entrusted me at Brill, despite the high investment with this project. But Barend de Haar, the former Oxford professor now in Hamburg, I think he recently retired, he once said to me in Heidelberg, when he was still working in Heidelberg, that was still what was really necessary was a single character dictionary of classical Chinese English.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. And I kept that in mind, and I asked around and around, and it didn't come about because nobody wanted to do it, etc. At some point, Paul Kroll, who has become a very dear friend, personal friend to me over the years, he said, "Oh, okay, I'll do it." And then I managed to persuade the Brill management to pay for the costs, also his costs.
Yeah.
He bought him from his time from university, and 1 year and a half he single-handedly, almost with the help of David Knechtrus and some others, they helped him, but the majority of the part was done by him single-handedly. And that was on the basis of a copy of Matthew's dictionary, which has, of course, was an enormous boon and present at the time, but an increasing source of frustration for scholars. So I saw his copy. It's more blue and red than black. And he worked from there.
Okay.
Yes, and he made use of other sources, I guess. And every month he wrote about, I don't remember exactly, but 400 or 500 articles.
Oh, you mean like entries?
Yeah. Entries, yes.
Yeah,
Lemata with articles. And with an iron discipline, he worked on it for 1 year and a half. And then it is, of course, proofs, etc., the whole thing, and the typesetting and the designers and blah, blah, but that's what came about. And Brill even discovered that it might make sense not only to make an expensive hardcover, but it was published in hardcover, in paperback, and on Playco as an add-on to their dictionary platform app. Yeah, so all at the same time.
Yes.
And it's been a massive success.
Yes, I own a hardcover.
I'm happy to hear.
And 2 soft covers.
I'm so happy to
and
hear.
the Pleco copy.
Good.
And I also use the online version.
Well, I can only ask you to buy 3 Plecos, but for the rest you are really...
No, one Pleco
Okay.
is enough, yeah. But
Yeah.
basically at Cambridge our students were also using, the undergraduates.
Yeah.
This is what they could use in their exams, for example.
Yes.
And so we very much endorse this.
Yeah.
And I think this made our life much, much simpler.
Well, this is really a milestone. A good dictionary is yeah.
Yes, and we all owned a copy of Matthew's.
Yes.
I remember I bought mine for £30. I used one in London, Chinatown, many years ago. And it was an endless source of frustration because you would look up something and it would make absolutely no sense.
No.
Or it would say something that just I wouldn't understand what they meant by that.
Well, you could also argue if it's difficult and you reach the goal nevertheless of understanding, you memorize it easier.
Yeah,
as an
that wasn't
advocate of the devil.
the case.
It wasn't the case.
And even like looking up characters was, well, initially at least, it was a challenge until you got used to it.
Yeah.
But it was a very, like, considering the quality of the dictionary, it was immensely popular.
Yeah.
And so everybody was frustrated with it.
Wasn't he a missionary?
Yes, he was a missionary.
Yeah. And what creed? What was he? Protestant or Catholic?
I think he was Protestant. Yeah.
Well, that's.
Well.
We also published online Le Grand Ricci, the great Jesuits' achievement in Chinese studies and dictionary. Yeah.
That's an even better dictionary, but unfortunate for most English or British undergraduates, it's in French, right?
Yeah, but there are also Czech and German and French and English versions actually of the source language, and I know where they are, and we are considering of publishing them online, but we don't know. It depends on the state of the materials.
Right. Yeah.
By the way, I have no background in Chinese at all.
Okay.
So I really rely on people like you and our network. I don't like that word network. My friends or acquaintances or befriended scholars who help me out. Yeah.
Okay. The network, the social capital.
Yeah,
you don't like these words?
No, I don't like human resources either. No.
Okay.
No.
So, on that note, can you tell us something about your own background, your own research background or interests?
Well, as I said, I have a degree in Latin and Greek. That's the old Dutch system of doctorandus. And a major in Greek philosophy, Stoics. And I like languages. In Holland, we had an extensive language system because Holland is a tiny country. At the same time, it was and still is a considerable trading nation. So if we want to extract money from these ships, we speak their language. We don't expect them to speak our language, unlike the Brits. So we had a good education in French and in German and in English. And then at the gymnasia we had Latin and Greek. And that has been an enormous... Yeah, I always took pleasure in language, so I kept up with the languages, which helped me in my acquisition, because my job is traveling around the world, going to the conference, to the campuses, Campi, MSA, and talk with the scholars with ideas or asking them about their ideas and see whether they're willing to publish with us. My basic job is to expand the list in real terms, in commercial terms, to grow the profits every year, or the income at least. But I've always been working on languages, so I learned more languages. And I do some writing in small Dutch journals, but these are small things. And I still have my projects, and I won't let anybody know until I succeed in them. But I hope to do something more. And I simply read a lot in the languages I know. Because every language has its own flavor, its own strengths. And every language has its own paths through the brain.
That's true, yeah.
So you can argue, this is a bit coffee table talk, that as you make use of different parts of your brain in circuits, and your neurons having the tendency to attach to other neurons with the synapses, the axons, you can say that each language has its own path, has its own associations, by means of the talks we have now in English or in French. Each language has its own persona in me.
Yes.
And it's nice to switch from one persona to the other. And the same applies to reading books. You are suddenly somewhere else, and you see another world through the eyes of a very gifted thinker and writer. And
it's still your experience.
It's still my experience. And the brain is plastic, so it shapes itself through the experience we have. And I try to observe that in myself and in others. And I'm sorry life ends at some point. Because it's... being born a human, it's a human being. It's quite something. You take it for granted. The default is death. Let's face it. And this only these 70, 80 years you live and are in your right mind. Make good use of it. And reading and acquainting oneself, befriending oneself with people alive or dead who are interesting, really is an enormous enrichment. In that way, my job has been the perfect job for me.
Very nice, yeah.
It's really the ideal job. Yeah.
And I know you also mentioned that you have online reading group, right?
No, it's not online. I have a small reading circle of old gentlemen, 5 old gentlemen, and we read Horace together, the Roman poet
it's in
Horace.
Person. So
in person, yes.
Okay.
So every 6 weeks we sit down together. I prepare an ode of Horace, close reading, and, well, we're getting closer to Horace. You try to recognize him as a person, see the person behind the character through 1,000 years of time, through different language, through different culture, across different culture. You can really meet the human being sitting there, standing there and dictating his poem to a slave, probably. Yeah. The working of the brain is we are our brains for some time of our lives, conscious lives, and better make a good use of it, and that's what I'm trying, and what scholars are trying to do. But I feel myself blessed that I don't have to do just one thing and be good at it. Perhaps I'm more superficial, but I know a lot of things about, not very deeply, but I've got a notion of many things I acquired through my work and through my reading books, basically, and listening to people.
Very nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Imre.
And
very much appreciated.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.